Hello everyone. Imagine, if you can, the culture war, the great clash of ideologies taking place on the battleground of all the media we read, watch, play, and listen to. Then narrow your focus, if you're able, to just one front of that conflict, the video games front. What I'm going to do today is attempt to relay to you a single incident that happened on that front not too long ago. It wasn't a very consequential incident, it didn't really come to much, and it was almost entirely contained on the aggressive side of the culture war, and it wasn't even particularly popular there, to be honest, in terms of the number of people who cared about it. Nevertheless, I am going to tell you about it today. So our story begins with a tweet from the 1st of February of this year. The account @Grums on Twitter wrote, "It's AAA game dev, triggering time. New Stellar Blade trailer just dropped." So if you're anything approaching a normal person, you probably have a few questions about this tweet. Who is Grums? What is Stellar Blade? It's a video game. And why is a video game trailer being released being assumed here to be, quote, triggering to game developers, since, that's the sort of thing you'd imagine they'd be used to, right? So let's attempt to answer these questions. Very quickly, @Grums is the Twitter account of game developer Mark Kern. Mark Kern is best known for working at Blizzard Entertainment on the original release of popular MMO World of Warcraft in the early 2000s. Kern left Blizzard in 2005 and has since spent his time doing sod all. Well, that's not very fair. After leaving Blizzard, Kern co-founded Red 5 Studios, a company he became the CEO of in 2008. Red 5 Studios was creating a game called Firefall, the production of which was very turbulent. Kern came under fire for allegedly massively overspending on advertising for the game, most notably on a custom-ordered Firefall-themed bus which cost millions of dollars and was rubbish. Employees within Red 5 described Kern's leadership style as erratic, impulsive, and very disruptive. He was accused of taking extended absences from work only to turn up and suddenly demand sweeping changes to the game. As such, he was generally seen as a hindrance to Firefall's development, and he was eventually removed as CEO by the company's board of directors. Kern then founded Mech Entertainment in 2014, raising $1 million with the aim of creating a blockchain-integrated virtual reality MMO for the Oculus Rift. And that didn't happen, obviously. Kern's next game, I suppose, was Ember, written EM-8ER, which is touted as a spiritual successor to Firefall. See, Firefall, Ember, you get it. Ember is, as far as I can tell, looking at development videos on YouTube, a game where you play a robot and shoot at little white cubes. Ember was announced 8 years ago and was in its pre-alpha phase for ever. It is still in its pre-alpha phase, Kern has made a lot of big promises about all the features the game is definitely going to have in the future, but as the years roll by, even the people who pay to support this project are starting to sound a little frustrated with him.
So this part is directly for you, Grums. Get off Twitter. Stop with this anti-woke crusade and just focus on the game. If you want to prove everyone is wrong, then be quiet, hunker down, and make what you keep telling the world you're going to make.
The top YouTube comment on one of these videos says that Ember, quote, is already running the exact same course as Firefall did back then, and for the same reasons. Ages of radio silence, change of gameplay focus, countless redesigns, lack of leadership, mismanagement of project funds. Both projects suffer from the same major problem, Mark Kern. Now, the YouTuber in the clip there mentioned an anti-woke crusade from Mark Kern, which we'll get to in a second, but related to that, how do you get people to pay for a pre-alpha game which barely exists? Because people subscribe to support this game, the Ember website advertises founder packs which go up to $1,500 and which offer various in-game perks. And by in-game perks, I of course mean if and when the game actually exists to the point where something could be described as being in it, these perks could be in it. What does it mean, for instance, to buy a character skin in Ember? Well, right now it means you get access to a picture of concept art of a skin for a character which as of yet does not actually exist. And the purchase agreement on the site makes it very clear you cannot ask for a refund on any digital purchase so long as the game is in development. Now, I don't want to make any legally actionable claims here, but I have seen a few people suggest that this whole thing is a bit shady. At a glance, it resembles all the worst of fear of missing out, limited time offer, predatory game monetization, only without the actual game part backing it up. So why, you might ask, would somebody pay money to support this project? Well, if we look through some of these skins, there's certainly a theme, isn't there? A scantily clad lady theme. So keeping those scantily clad ladies in mind, let's talk about the anti-woke crusade. You see, Mark Kern is, to the apparent annoyance of the Ember fanbase, a very active Twitter user, having more than 200,000 followers, and he mainly complains about wokeness, DEI, SJWs, political correctness, or whatever they're calling it this week. For Kern and the anti-woke crowd, there's a battle going on for the soul of video games, you see. Everywhere they look, they see insidious attempts to insert racial and sexual minorities into video games. Not out of some altruistic desire to see wider representation in media, or even a profit-driven desire to market the game to more demographics, but a deliberately malicious attempt to ruin video games. They here can be a very wide variety of people, but it's mainly Western AAA game developers, many indie game developers, most video game publishers, video game distribution services, video game journalists, various video game journalism outlets, consultancy firms who work in the video game industry, woke gamers, and so on. All of those groups, they are part of the woke mind virus, and they're ruining video games by conspiring to put black characters in games and trans characters in games and make all the beautiful ladies into ugly ladies. And why are they doing this, you might wonder? Well, without going on too long of a tangent, if you dig into it, you'll find the same old right-wing narrative about so-called cultural Marxists attempting to undermine society by eroding and destroying traditional standards of beauty. The only difference is when we talk about traditional standards of beauty today, we're not talking about classical art or architecture, we're talking about dead or alive beach volleyball. And it's interesting, isn't it, how once upon a time regressives saw video games as one example of the ugly modern degeneracy that was undermining culture, whereas for regressive gamers today, video games play the role of the culture they want to preserve against the ugly modern degeneracy. It's the exact same cultural Marxist script being run, but video games have swapped sides. Regardless, they being the people who make, publish, market, review, and play video games, are coming to destroy video games, and so video games must be defended. Now in practice, this usually translates to throwing a tantrum anytime a video game with a character creator has pronoun options, but it also means supporting video games that come across to them as being anti-woke. And Stellar Blade from Korean developer Shift Up was flagged as a potential anti-woke game soon after it was announced, featuring as it does a protagonist who is a sexualized, conventionally attractive lady who wears a variety of skimpy outfits. Hence, it's AAA game dev triggering time, says Mark Kern. The Stellar Blade trailer is supposed to be upsetting to game developers who supposedly hate conventionally attractive ladies in skimpy outfits. That's what's going on here. The next month, when a demo for Stellar Blade was released, Kern posted on Twitter, "Now that Stellar Blade demo is out, so be on the lookout and DM me or at me any tasty dev or press meltdown please. I'm sure there is some massive triggering going on. Fellow devs," yeah right, "if you have inside stories to tell on the internal reactions to Stellar Blade, my DMs are open." So there is a massive triggered meltdown reaction to the Stellar Blade demo going on. Kern is sure of it. It's just that for the moment it's going on somewhere where we can't see it. It's an internal outrage, apparently. It's a quiet one, and so he has to ask for examples of it. And let's read a few responses to some of Kern's tweets here. "Oh no, beautiful women that for some reason get gay men and ugly women mad. More of this please, the industry needs to heal. Ah, why do normal people find attractive people attractive? Gaming devs and press. Ah, me, jiggle physics, he. Pearl clutching intensifies," along with a gif of a woman shouting, "I hate you." And there were a lot more responses in this vein. Rather smug gamers posting reaction gifs and writing little skits about how upset the woke game developer / journalist mob are about Stellar Blade. You see, the gamer lads here see Stellar Blade's character designs as a political statement, one running counter to their characterization of how the so-called woke mob is trying to ruin games with diversity and ugliness and so on. So Stellar Blade to them represents a pushback against a perceived Puritan attempt to remove all the attractive, sexy characters from video games. Except, I am old enough to remember all the way back to 1 year ago, when Baldur's Gate 3 came out. Baldur's Gate 3, developed by Larian Studios, is the third installment of the Baldur's Gate series and has been a massive commercial and critical success. It's sold more than 10 million copies, it's one of the highest rated games of all time on Metacritic, it won the Game of the Year award at the Golden Joystick Awards, the Game Awards, the British Academy Game Awards, and the Game Developers' Choice Awards. It was also named as Game of the Year by various gaming journalism outlets such as GameSpot, GamesRadar, PC Gamer, Screen Rant, and many others. Game developers and game journalists absolutely love Baldur's Gate 3. And Baldur's Gate 3 is horny as hell. To start with, I don't even know if I can show you the character creator from Baldur's Gate 3, but it's got options, let's say. Like, foreskin options. I myself have been playing through Baldur's Gate 3 recently and having a grand old time with it, playing a fancy little gnome bard, but I haven't really been pursuing the romantic or sexual options, and as such I didn't really have an idea of the extent of it. So instead I had a click through the IGN YouTube upload of the romance scenes in the game, which is more than 2 hours long by the way, and I was red-faced and scandalized clicking through some of this. They do it. You see their bits. And there's everything. There's naked demon ladies and tentacled squid men. I think someone had it off with a bear at one point. They are going for it in Baldur's Gate, apparently. So we've got a seemingly extremely wide variety of romance options, and you can design your character to look however you like, be as attractive or unattractive as you want to be, and your party of conventionally attractive companions can be dressed, or undressed, or romanced by you, and all this raises a question, doesn't it? If so-called woke Western game developers and Puritan journalists supposedly hate sex and sexiness and attractiveness so much, why was this veritable orgy of a game so beloved by them? This would be the exact sort of thing that they're supposed to hate, right? But they think it's great, clearly, so what's going on here then? To attempt to answer this, let's first see if we can try to find any examples of any game developers or journalists actually being mad about Stellar Blade. As it turns out, Mark Kern's call for examples of Stellar Blade meltdowns netted one singular potential lead. A Twitter user replied to Kern on the 30th of March saying, "Take a look at IGN France." So let's take a look at IGN France. This page is a preview of Stellar Blade, talking about the pre-release demo of the game, which was posted on the 27th of March, in French, on the website IGN France. The writer of this article is on the whole very enthusiastic about nearly every aspect of Stellar Blade, praising the combat, the atmosphere, the soundtrack, and so on. The single exception is the main character, Eve's, character design, which he refers to as bland and likens to a doll sexualized by someone who has never seen a woman. Now I think this second point here is not really fair for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I'd say that it's a bit hasty to so definitively judge Eve's character design based off of playing a demo which only shows a very small part of the game's story, because it's possible that the full game would give some additional context to the character designs. It might not be all that likely, but it is possible, so I'd call this a bit of a rush to judgment, to be honest. The article compares Eve's design unfavourably to that of Bayonetta and 2B from Nier Automata, which are designs that I like and think work in the games that they're in, but you might not get the full context of why they work if you've only played a small demo segment of the game, right? So if I were writing this demo review, I'd probably have said something like, from what we can see in the demo, Eve seems bland and hopefully the full game fleshes her out a bit more, something like that. Next, the doll sexualized by someone who's never seen a woman line could be read as a crack at the developers, and I don't really think it's all that fair to take a crack at the devs having not played the full game. I must say though, I don't think it actually is a serious crack at the devs, since the next paragraph of the review talks about the Korean model, Shin Jae-yoon, whose body scan served as the base for Eve's in-game model, so obviously the author knows the developers have seen a real woman. They're just describing Eve's design in a hyperbolic way. Still though, in isolation, this comes across as a bit prematurely rude, and IGN France apparently agreed with this because they later deleted the sexualized by someone who has never seen a woman sentence and apologized to the developers of Stellar Blade. So, you might be thinking, is that it? Is this the extent of the massive triggering that Mark Kern was so sure was going on? A single sentence from the French preview of the demo of Stellar Blade, which was otherwise very positive about the game and recommended it. Surely that's not going to be enough, right? If we're going to kick off a culture war battle about this, we're going to need a little more ammunition, aren't we? It's going to be hard to claim that journalists are trying to destroy Stellar Blade or something ridiculous like that if you only have one example and it's from someone who likes Stellar Blade. And it's going to be even harder to claim that journalists are biased against conventionally attractive characters in video games, considering the author of this piece spoke favourably about both Bayonetta and 2B from Nier Automata. They just called Eve's design bland by comparison. So surely this can't be enough, can it? Oh no. What's happened here then? It seems we've got some discourse to take a look at. So, where did all this come from? Well, later on the 30th of March, Mark Kern posted a tweet showing the offending sentence from the IGN France article, alongside a picture of the same woman mentioned in the article, who was scanned to provide Eve's character model, as well as a picture of the CEO of ShiftUp's wife, who also works at the company. So this is a classic gotcha, isn't it? The article says Eve is like a doll sexualized by someone who has never seen a woman, but look, here are some women who worked on the game, which contradicts that assessment. Very good. It is undercut somewhat, though, by the fact the IGN France article does talk about that Korean model, in the very next paragraph in fact, saying, quote, Shin Jae-yoon, the poor Korean model serving as the character's model, is lost under layers of clumsy plastic modifications that make her unrecognizable both in body and face. So this tweet from Mark Kern doesn't really work all that well on that front, does it? Eve was based on a real woman doesn't work as a retort to someone who acknowledges her design was based on a real woman, but dislikes it in part for not resembling that woman. In fact, this tweet only works as a retort if you specifically do not include the context that the IGN France article talks about Shin Jae-yoon, which Mark Kern, of course, does not. Now, many of these videos are just people reading out this tweet from Mark Kern and having a big old laugh about how IGN France doesn't know Eve is based on a real woman, which of course they do, because they talk about her, but these YouTubers don't know that because they didn't go and read the article. All they've seen of it is this one sentence from Mark Kern's tweet.
This tweet by Grum seems to be going viral currently. It's at over 50,000 likes and almost 2 million views after a day, and that because it embarrasses IGN and two of the arguments they made. It says, so IGN calls the Stellar Blade protagonist a sexualized doll and says the creator's never seen a living woman. And after that, showcasing the not real doll, as IGN called her, and then the creator's wife, who's also simultaneously an artist on the team. So apparently IGN was too lazy to do even the most basic research on the game before publishing such disrespectful statements.
And yes, so IGN calls Stellar Blade protagonist a sexualized doll and says the creator has never seen a living woman. So, as you see, IGN spreading lies, as of course the mainstream always does. And this is only going to get worse because of the left-wing lunatics that are out there.
Because once again, there is no research or nothing being shown. This is why people are calling this out right now. Because it's quite literally a model. This is quite literally a real-life person this is based on.
And I always find this to be kind of a stupid take because this is the model the game is based on, being motion captured here. It is very much based on real women.
Now, Kern's tweet was one way into this discourse. Some other YouTubers were instead reading out this article from boundingintocomics.com, which makes the same mistake as Kern, saying, further, while Eve herself may be a fictional character, her appearance is not, instead being based on a full one-to-one body scan of real-world South Korean model Shin Jae-yoon. In light of both their ignoring of these facts and their blatant attempt to insult Kim, that's the CEO of Shift Up there, both Asola and IGN France soon found themselves facing a massive wave of backlash from the general public regarding their lack of journalistic integrity. Which, one, is very funny talking about journalistic integrity while accusing IGN France of ignoring something that they did in fact talk about, and two, is very funny claiming there was a massive wave of backlash from the general public about this. Yes, they were marching in the streets of Paris, weren't they, about this article? Do you hear the people sing? We demand IGN France acknowledge that Eve from Stellar Blade on the PS5 was based on Korean model Shin Jae-eun. Even though they did. Now, the third way that YouTubers got into this discourse was by copying each other's videos. Like, look, he's just nicked his thumbnail and all. Some of these videos were commentary videos, you see, and by commentary videos I of course mean they watched a video that someone else made and paused it occasionally and said, yeah.
And I always find this to be kind of a stupid take because this is the model the game is based on, being motion captured here. It is very much based on real women.
That's big-time internet streamer Asmongold putting his personal touch on this discourse by sitting in the corner there and watching this other video on the channel Yellow Flash Productions, which covers both the tweet from Mark Kern and the article on boundingintocomics.com. The video of Asmongold's stream posted on the channel Asmongold TV got nearly 1 million views, more than 10 times the views of the video he was watching, but don't feel bad about that. Asmongold is just watching someone read out something someone else said about something they didn't do any research about. It is lazy bastards all the way down today. Lazy and liars as well. Let's take a look at a couple of these thumbnails. This one from the channel Manix has a fake quote from an IGN Twitter account that says, in all caps, "Don't buy this game." This one also shows up in the thumbnails for videos on other channels, like these ones. There's also fake review scores in there, pretending IGN gave the game a score of 3 out of 10, which, I mean, it wasn't even out yet, and they hadn't reviewed it. They gave it a 7 when they did review it. The channel Dread Roberts has a video with a thumbnail that proclaims, "They want this game to die," in all caps, along with the quote, "She's a whore," under the IGN logo. Which, well, IGN didn't say that, of course. Even the IGN France article that criticised Eve's design was broadly positive about the other aspects of the game. I mean, it doesn't make sense, does it? If IGN wanted to hurt the sales of Stellar Blade, why would they attack it in only a single paragraph of an otherwise favourable preview that only went up on their French website? Like, if there's some plot from IGN to destroy Stellar Blade, it's being expressed in the most obscure, contradictory way possible. So why are these videos pretending that IGN did trash the game and try to kill it? Well, for clicks, obviously. They want a big culture war Gamergate moment so badly that they're willing to play pretend to try to get one started. And this is one of the interesting things to me today. It's the yearning for a lost glory, I suppose. Watching through some of these videos reminded me of those Imperial Japanese soldiers living in the jungle who didn't realise World War II was over. These are the bedraggled remnants of the Gamergate army, bravely fighting on long past the point where anyone else cares at all. I think we need to get in touch with Davis Arini or someone so we can formally give them the order to stand down. One thing that stood out to me watching these videos was that the video makers would often make very confident predictions about both 1. Stellar Blade being a great game deserving of very high scores, and 2. the gaming press giving it low scores when it does come out. Watching one of these videos, I heard a guy say he was sure Stellar Blade would get low review scores, quote, "nothing close to the higher scores it deserves." Deserves. And this was posted in a video before Stellar Blade was released. Like, they're already sure it's a great game. It's already deserving of high scores before they've even played it, simply by virtue of what it represents. Now, it would be unfair of me to dole out criticisms of people speaking prematurely about a game they haven't played if I myself then went on to talk about said game having not played it. So I played the entirety of Stellar Blade. I streamed it on my Twitch channel, which I'll link in the description. So out of a sense of due diligence and to prove I actually did play the game, I'm going to review Stellar Blade now for too long. We'll get to the character designs later on, but for now I'll say that whatever criticisms can be made about Eve's character design, there are other characters in Stellar Blade who deserve those same criticisms, but to a much greater degree. If Eve's design is a little uncanny valley, then at the bottom of the uncanny valley is opened up an uncanny sinkhole which contains neotenous monsters like Kaya and Lily who make Eve look positively pedestrian by comparison. I'll give a spoiler warning here for Stellar Blade, of course, and I also have to give a spoiler warning here for the 2017 game Nier Automata for reasons that will become very apparent very quickly. So okay, Stellar Blade. If I had to sum up Stellar Blade in a single word, I'd say it is derivative. As an example here, let's start out by giving an overview of the basic premise of the story. So, in Stellar Blade, you play as an android on a post-apocalyptic Earth that was devastated in an ancient war between what you're told was humanity and a race of alien invaders. Launching from a base in orbit of the planet, your mission is to fight and defeat the invaders on behalf of a humanity that, unbeknownst to you, no longer exists. Now, anyone who's played Platinum Games' 2017 release Nier Automata will right now be saying, hang on a minute, isn't that just the plot of Nier Automata? And yes, it is. The plot of Stellar Blade is strikingly similar to the plot of Nier Automata. The only difference is in the twist, really. In Nier, the twist is that the humanity you're fighting for is extinct, whereas in Stellar Blade, it's that the humanity you're fighting for actually turned into the monsters that you're fighting. So, it's not exactly the same, but it does give big, can I copy your homework vibes. Being kind, we'll say it took very heavy inspiration. The story and world and many elements of the general design and gameplay and music especially are very derivative of Nier Automata, but Stellar Blade also borrowed from other places. The combat system takes inspiration from the likes of Sekiro and God of War. It's got the Souls-like enemy respawn mechanic. There are horror-styled sections that are trying to be like a Dead Space or a Resident Evil. There's a bit where you climb up a train car as it's falling off a cliff, which is literally just the first level of Uncharted 2. The last human city on this post-apocalyptic Earth is called Zion. Like in The Matrix, you might say, but no, this Zion is spelled with an X, so it's different. The people of Zion look up to an old, wise robot leader called Oracle. Kind of like the Oracle in The Matrix, you might say, but no, this is Oracle with no E, so it's different. The android residents of Zion are being stored in a bunch of pods to save power, so they're not generating power, they're in the pods to save power. So again, it's not exactly like The Matrix, but it is heavily reminiscent of The Matrix, yes. Now, there's nothing wrong with taking inspiration from other media, of course. Lots of great games wear their inspirations openly, but the problem with Stellar Blade is that it takes all of this stuff and smushes it together and then doesn't really do anything interesting with it. While a lot of the individual elements of Stellar Blade are fine by themselves, they don't ever really come together. The game feels more like a mix of various things the creators thought would be cool to put in a video game, rather than things that actually made sense to put in this video game. As an example, let's look at some enemy designs. So enemies in this game are called Naytibas, which, if you know about the conflation of V's with B's in certain languages, including Korean, congratulations, you've spoiled yourself on the twist. Although it could be worse, in previews of the game, the Naytibas were called natives. I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards. Anyway, the story with the Naytibas is that humanity was in a war with an AI that wanted to replace them with androids, and in their desperation the humans turned to bioengineering to evolve humanity to the point where they could fight back. But these bioengineering experiments got out of control or something, and the humans lost their minds and turned into monsters. So that's the setup, but let's take a look at some of these enemy designs. Some of them look like big insects. Some of them look like mutated statues, some of them look like squids, some of them look like robots, some of them look like different sorts of robots with fleshy parts hanging out, some of them look like giant beasts, some of them look like organisms controlling a human host, some of them look like zombies, some of them look like fungal growths or spores or something. One boss looks like this, another looks like this, another looks like this, and so on. There's no theme to these enemies. They seem like a collection of designs inspired by other games and media. Bayonetta, Half-Life, Metal Gear Solid, Ghost in the Shell, Final Fantasy, and whatever else. Did you like, by the way, in Final Fantasy VII when the final boss had a wing on only one side of his body? Because if you did, all of your Christmases have come at once, I'm happy to tell you. I think they ripped that design off about 6 times. And now don't get me wrong, a lot of Stellar Blade's enemy designs are fine in isolation, but they're used absolutely faultlessly in the actual game, with either zero or very thin reasoning for what you're actually fighting to be designed the way it is, or located where it is. A lot of these designs were peppered throughout the world seemingly at random. Stellar Blade's music is another example of this. I quite like a lot of the game's soundtrack actually, but I disliked and sometimes couldn't stand the way in which it was used in the game. A lot of the music is fine, but whether or not any track actually matched the part of the game it was used in felt like it was random chance. For instance, the underground horror sequences with jump scares and scary monsters and so on have any tension whatsoever completely evaporated because for some reason they sound like this. I confess I'm disappointed with a lot of mainstream game reviews that rank each aspect of a game with a numerical score, but never consider how the different elements of the game work together. Like, absurd example obviously, but Stardew Valley has a great soundtrack for a relaxing farming sim, but Stardew Valley's soundtrack would not be a good soundtrack for Alien Isolation to have, or vice versa I suppose. You know, even though it would be the same music, it would be a bad soundtrack because of the context it was being used in. It's an obvious point, but you have to consider the whole package and not just each element by itself. The combat in Stellar Blade can be fun. All the parrying, evading, and executing Eve's flashy special moves can be pretty cool when everything comes together. There's the bones of a good combat system here, but unfortunately the game has an issue with balance that more often than not undercuts the fun. The problem is the game has a very flat difficulty curve. Enemies at the beginning of the game are mechanically just as hard as enemies at the end, and there isn't really much difference between fighting any of the bosses in terms of skill either. The game increases the difficulty by simply turning up enemy HP and damage values, but this just has the effect of making the later game feel like a bit of a slog, as you spend a long time whacking away at enemies that are by this point trivial to beat mechanically, but can have what feel like arbitrarily enormous health pools. From Software's Sekiro is a good comparison here. The enemies at the start of Sekiro are both weaker and mechanically much simpler than the enemies at the end, but the game prevents things from ever turning into a slog by means of its death blow mechanic, which is genius. If you can fill an enemy's posture gauge in Sekiro by keeping up the pressure on them by parrying their attacks and hitting them with your own, you can drain their entire health bar in a single hit regardless of how much health they have left. And this goes for every enemy in the game, even bosses. If you prove you've mastered the mechanics of how to fight them enough to break their posture, you get to end the fight right there. I mentioned Sekiro's posture mechanic here because they put a superficially similar system in Stellar Blade. The posture bar is replaced with these little balance pips under the enemy health pool. Hitting enemies with certain abilities or executing perfect parries will take away one of these pips, and once you deplete them all, you can execute a flashy special move similar to Sekiro's Death Blow, only here, instead of killing the enemy outright, it does a rather underwhelming amount of damage. I felt a little deflated every time I managed to pull one of these off against a boss. You go to all that effort focusing on parrying and whittling away their balance, and you're rewarded with a big flashy attack animation that ends up not really doing all that much. Feeling that my efforts to actually engage with the game's combat mechanics weren't really being appreciated, I ended up beating many bosses by mindlessly spamming Eve's special moves over and over, because why not? Eve has a fancy combat mode she can shift into, similar to God of War's Spartan Rage, where she gains access to a new moveset, as well as growing a single wing on one side of her body, fancy that. The spin move she can do in this form has a knockback effect that prevents enemies from countering, so you can just press that over and over with no way for whatever you're fighting to ever do anything back to you. It feels like they made the more mechanically interesting and engaging elements of the combat give low gameplay rewards, whereas mindless repetitive spam is much more consistently rewarded. There are conflicting design influences here that work against each other. Stellar Blade feels like it's trying to be a little bit like Sekiro and a little bit like God of War and a little bit like Nier Automata and Bayonetta and Dead Space and so on, and all the different systems can end up getting in the way of each other. I will say though that when the Stellar Blade developers were looking at other game franchises for things to borrow, I wish that they'd also borrowed some character traits for their characters to have. The main character, and the subject of all the fake outrage today, is Eve, who is a blank slate with the emphasis on blank. Eve is exceptionally one-dimensional. Her only major motivation is to complete the mission she was assigned, and as far as I can tell, there aren't any interesting reasons for her to want to be doing that. She isn't trying to prove herself, she doesn't desire to be seen in a certain way, she isn't devoting herself to the mission to compensate for something else, she just has been given a mission and so is going to do it because that's her job. Eve doesn't really have a sense of humour, and she doesn't engage much with the world beyond the extent she needs to in order to accomplish whatever her task is at that moment. Beyond wanting to complete the mission, as far as other character traits for Eve go, after playing through the whole story, all I've got is that she doesn't like swimming, she often complains about having to go in water, and she seems to like collecting the various collectible cans hidden throughout the game's levels. And that's it. It's pretty thin for a main character there. Or is it? I mean, a main character doesn't necessarily have to be all that complex, do they? You might say Mario or Link are simple game characters with straightforward motivations, for instance, and they're perfectly fine. So what's the problem with Eve being simplistic? Well, the difference is the way in which the narrative is being conveyed, I think. Stellar Blade has long cutscenes, a lot of dialogue, radio chatter while you're playing through the missions, and if a game is going to make you listen to a character talking for hours, it might be nice if they occasionally had something interesting to say. Nintendo doesn't make you watch hours of Mario talking in boring cutscenes, do they? No, he just says, "It's-a me Mario, let's-a go," and that's all he needs to say. Let's compare Eve to a few other video game characters here. Cloud from Final Fantasy VII and the remake starts out trying very hard to be seen as a stoic, no-nonsense, just there for the mission kind of guy. But over the course of the story, we realise that this stoic persona is an affectation. Cloud is actually a pretty insecure and vulnerable person who's merely trying to present a cool and disaffected front. He is the way he is at the start of the story because he's trying to protect himself. He's traumatized. The way he's acting is a defense mechanism. Kratos from 2018's God of War. He wants very much to be stoic and unemotional, doesn't he? Having recently lost his wife, he now has to face raising his son alone, and he's scared, and he doesn't know how to be a good father. He only knows how to fight, so he throws himself into that as a distraction. But below the surface, there's a lot of pain and sadness and anger that he doesn't want to let out. And his character arc in the story he's in involves him coming to terms with those things. A bit of a departure genre-wise here, but Kim Kitsuragi from Disco Elysium tries exceptionally hard to be boring, but, or partly because of that, he ends up being one of the most interesting characters ever put in a video game. Kim doesn't like to discuss emotions, he doesn't want to get personal, he just wants to do his job, and be seen to be doing his job, boringly. Now what makes Kim so interesting are the times when that carefully maintained facade cracks, and you see the person behind it. What makes all of these characters interesting is precisely that, when you see the person they are behind the curtain, and you find out why it is they act the way they do. Kim, for instance, is someone who's subject to racial discrimination. He's gay, he's been made fun of because he wears thick glasses, and for embarrassing assignments in his past. And, well, there's a lot we could say about Kim, but I'd be in danger of just speaking about Disco Elysium for the whole video, so we'll simplify it and say that Kim really doesn't like to stand out. One commonality here is that all these seemingly simplistic, straightforward characters have other characters to play off, characters with different personalities who draw them out of their shell. Cloud has the rest of his team, though especially Aerith. Kratos has Atreus and Mimir. 2B has 9S. Kim has Harry. You know, these are characters who are not like them. They might be funny or chaotic or inquisitive or troublesome, and they put the stoic characters in situations that cause them to open up and change, to have a character arc. Now this is hardly Shakespeare, except Disco Elysium of course, which is Shakespeare. This is just the basics of character writing. All these characters have an inner world, which is what they're like on the inside, and they also have a face that they choose to show to the world. Now with Stellar Blade, Eve doesn't have an inner world. That's really the crux of it, I suppose. Eve is a shell with no personality inside. Now this could actually be a good starting point for a story if, over the course of that story, Eve grew into something more complex than she is at the beginning. And reading about the development of the game, it seems as though this was the intention. The director of the game told Games Radar that, quote, as the game progresses, Eve takes on more and more burdens and comes to make important decisions. She gets to interact with more characters and other people and becomes more human. In the beginning, she's more soldier-like and doesn't have that many emotions or show much expression. As the game and story progresses, you get to see the change in her emotions. And while this is a fine intention, it did not, for whatever reason, actually come across in the final product. Eve does not change over the course of the story. She's pretty much the same person the whole way through, regardless of what happens to her. Even the reveal that everything she thinks she knows about the world is a lie, and that the leader of her society has been manipulating her and everyone she knows, and that she is in fact not a human and is an android, and all the monsters she's been killing are actually the real humans, all that hits her like, what's the opposite of a ton of bricks? A single feather, I suppose. She just goes, oh well, alright, fair enough. May as well carry on and finish the game, I suppose. Then again, even if Eve had some hidden depth to her personality, even if there was something to be drawn out or developed in the course of her interactions with other characters, we would likely never see it, because her main companion is Adam, who is so wooden and boring himself he makes Eve seem like a fucking party clown. It's Adam who controls the little robot that follows Eve around and performs long-range attacks for her in combat, in another heavy nod to Nier Automata, and the vast majority of his dialogue consists of him saying things like, we need to find a way to open that door. And yes, Adam and Eve, literally. And now, hang on, I hear you say, didn't Nier Automata also have two characters called Adam and Eve? It did, yes. Now, our last main character is Lily the Engineer, a character whose design inspired me to Google Stellar Blade Lily alternate outfits and then go and find her something less ridiculous to wear. Lily's character profile does clarify that she is indeed a fully grown individual, which, I think the fact they felt they needed to clarify that is telling in and of itself. As for her character though, Lily, while also boring, tends to be more upbeat than the other two and occasionally expresses interest in learning things about the history of the world, and make the most of that, because Lily's occasional interest in non-mission critical information is by far the least boring that any of the three main characters are ever going to be. And as for the non-main characters, good lord. I would suspect that what they call AI was used somewhere in the scripting or translating of the background NPC dialogue in the game. The main story script at least seems like it's had a glance over by an actual human, but the bulk of the background NPC and side quest dialogue strays into the nonsensical. And that isn't an exaggeration from me there. It often literally makes no sense whatsoever.
Ah, Angel. Lovely to meet you.
You don't seem very likable.
All right. You're pretty sharp. Oh, I do like this, Angel. You really are my favorite customer.
Now, I don't want to be too unfair. Writing for video games can be very hard, of course. Thanks to reasons the writers often have no control over, segments of the game can be shifted around or cut entirely, and all of a sudden the story you wrote that made sense previously does not make sense anymore. At this point, you can either do a bunch of rewriting or, say, sod it and just release the game. And obviously, the writers aren't always in control of that process. And playing Stellar Blade, you can tell that the story making sense wasn't really a priority in development. As a small but telling example here, in one mission, Adam, your usual drone operator, is busy, so his duties are taken over by Lily. She pilots the drone and gives mission support to Eve without comment from either of them about Lily's piloting of the drone being especially unusual. Now, a little later on, Adam has to be away for another mission, so Lily pipes up and announces that she can pilot the drone in his stead, but this time, this suggestion leads to a conversation about whether or not Lily is able to fill in for Adam and pilot the drone on a mission. which is confusing to the player because you're sitting there thinking, hang on, hasn't Lily already been filling in for Adam when he isn't there? Why are they discussing the feasibility of her doing something that she did with no issue just a couple of hours ago? And I would assume that at some point in development, these two scenes happened in the opposite order to what they do in the finished game, and at some other point they got swapped around and not rewritten, so it just doesn't make sense now. Aside from these sorts of smaller plot holes, the overall story of Stellar Blade suffers from one major flaw, which I'd argue was caused by it choosing to not include the most interesting element of the much better story that it's ripping off. And that flaw is the Naytibas, the enemies in the game. They are very boring in a narrative sense. I've recently been streaming the Elden Ring DLC, Shadow of the Erd Tree, and playing that right after Stellar Blade has me noticing a lot of points of comparison. One interesting thing was that in certain dungeons in that game there are enemies which are these stone golem blacksmith things, and also enemies which are these little lava slime things. And in certain places, before they notice you, you can see the golems gently petting the slimes. And it might seem like a small thing, but seeing a golem petting a slime was literally more interesting than everything I ever saw all of the Naytiba enemies do in Stellar Blade put together. From Software has a history of doing things like that. Some enemies will try to run away from you, some seem too depressed to fight you and just sit there unless you attack them first. Some enemies will be fighting each other. There's a big dragon I like in Elden Ring which can no longer stand up and you can just poke it to death from behind, if you're evil. These sorts of things make the world more varied and interesting. They're things that make it seem as though the world would exist whether or not the player was actually in it, and they can cause the player to engage with that world more by prompting them to think about what it is that they're doing. Seeing the golems petting the slimes, or this hollow chilling out on a ledge in Dark Souls, those moments make those enemies more than just mindless monsters to be defeated in combat.
Is he petting that? Dude, is he petting a slime? Buddy, he's petting it. I can't kill this man. He has a pet.
Now, I'm not saying this is necessarily the right way to do things, to be clear. Everything I'm saying right now is dependent upon the type of game that's being made and what the creators want the player's relationship to its enemies to be. You can have a game with mindless inhuman enemies if you want, that's fine, but Stellar Blade, in its cutscenes and in its dialogue, is trying to ask questions about what it means to be human. So it seems like a big missed opportunity to have all the enemies in the game act so relentlessly inhuman. The reveal that the Naytibas were indeed once humans is treated as though it is important, as though you're supposed to have some thoughts or feelings about it. But the fact that every regular Naytiba enemy you meet is mindlessly aggressive and has no personality really undercuts the twist, because all the Naytibas do is immediately try to bash your head in, and I've never seen them do anything else, so who cares? You know, whether they are actually alien invaders or they are former humans, it doesn't actually matter, right? As regards you fighting them anyway. All they try to do is kill you, so whatever. It's as though Stellar Blade is expecting me to care about the concept of humanity in an exclusively biological sense, rather than in the sense of the qualities that make one a human. That the Naytibas were once biologically human is not really that meaningful if they don't have the ability to express the qualities of humanity. To imagine a different story, what if in Stellar Blade you played an android who had been indoctrinated with a bunch of lies about how Naytibas are all mindless alien monsters who need to be exterminated, and you get sent to Earth to do that, and then you start seeing Naytibas who are not like that, maybe doing things that mindless monsters shouldn't be doing, like communicating or forming factions, maybe not immediately attacking you always. Which is, of course, the plot of Nier Automata again, isn't it? In that game, your main enemies are the machines, who you start out believing are all mindless killbots programmed to fight you and nothing more, but then they start talking, and acting scared of you, and the two android characters, 2B and 9S, have to reassure each other that the machines do not have minds or personalities, that they're just saying random words, that they don't have feelings, so you don't have to worry about killing them. But of course, some of the machines have developed feelings and personalities, and you go on to meet whole societies of machines who are emulating human philosophy and politics and religion. And this recontextualizes both the characters and the player's relationship with the enemies in the game. Firstly, they don't always try to kill you, and you don't always have to kill them. And when they do try to fight you, it isn't always out of some mindless antagonism. Sometimes they fight you because they're scared of you, or out of religious fanaticism, or in defense of a society that they see you as a threat to. And all this plays into the twist with the humans being gone, of course, because while humanity, the biological beings, might be gone, humanity, the concept, is everywhere. And if that's the case, what does it mean for our characters to be fighting on behalf of humanity when their enemies are often acting more human than they are? Stellar Blade is like Nier Automata if the mindless killbots really were mindless killbots and never had anything interesting going on. And now you might say, Sean, are you really going to criticize Stellar Blade for copying so many things from Nier Automata, but also criticize it for not copying more? And I am, yes. If they're already copying so much, they should have just gone all in and copied this bit as well, because it's the most interesting bit. Outside of the main story, there are various side quests in Stellar Blade, and while a few are kind of interesting, most are unfortunately of the go to this place you were before and get me a thing variety. Nothing about the area you're sent back to changes or updates on these fetch quests, they're literally just busy work to pad the game's runtime. For example, an NPC in Zion called Barry asks you to get him some bottles of wine from a shop located in a ruined city that you'd visited previously. Now, because the game's fast travel system is area specific, getting back to that city involves heading to the nearest phone, fast traveling to your ship, talking to Adam to select to leave, picking your destination from a list, going to a phone at that location, fast traveling to the point nearest the shop, running to the shop, getting the bottles of wine, and then teleporting back to Barry. Now, if you think that sounds boring, then just you wait. Completing Barry's wine quest unlocks another quest where another resident of Zion says that they saw Barry had some wine, and now they too would like some wine. So can you please go and get them some wine? Now, where is this wine located? Well, in the exact same place you just got the wine for Barry, of course. So back to the phone, back to the ship, back to the city, back to the next phone, run to the shop again, pick up the wine again, deliver the wine. The exact same thing you just did, all over again. Stellar Blade's level design is, well, it's kind of a blast from the past, I guess you could call it. The game is divided into linear corridor levels and 2 large open areas. Multiple of the linear levels contain claustrophobic sections set in sewers and other enclosed areas, and the 2 more open zones, the desert and the wasteland, are, as you can imagine from the names, sparse stretches of terrain without much interesting going on really. In a bygone era, you might chalk this sort of thing up to technical limitations, ones that shouldn't really exist on the PS5. I guess it's nostalgic level design, if nothing else. I actually have a theory that a lot of the elements of Stellar Blade poked gamers of a certain age right in their nostalgia zones. The game reminds me a lot of a certain type of anime-inspired hack-and-slash game from the early 2000s that got praised for its flashy combat animations but criticised for its weak story and characters. But also, who really cares about that because you're clearly not here for the story or characters, are you? Something like Chaos Legion or Bujingai, The Forsaken City. You know, games that nobody has thought about for 20 years. But I know there's some people watching this video who are seeing this gameplay and saying, oh, I think I remember playing that on the PlayStation 2 when I was like 10. Stellar Blade is at its core just one of these. It's like one of these games got put in a time capsule 2 decades ago and then they unearthed and released it today. Now, to clarify, Stellar Blade is not the worst game in the world by any means, and it's not some huge crime for a video game to be a bit mediocre. Not every game can be the best game ever made, can it? But on the other hand, it is certainly not going to be this big cultural reset industry shift moment that the Gamergate remnants seem to expect it to be. It's just not that good. Ultimately, I'd say Stellar Blade is less than the sum of its parts. A lot of those parts are fine in isolation, it just never really comes together to form anything all that interesting. To use a cliché food metaphor, it's the difference between a meal and a bunch of uncooked ingredients. And Eve's character design is just another of those uncooked ingredients, I'm afraid. I've got no big problem with Eve's design myself, in a vacuum, but like a lot of the other elements of the game, it feels very arbitrary. One of the questions I had when deciding to play through Stellar Blade was, does it ever matter what Eve looks like or is dressed like in terms of either her character or the story she's in? And after having played it, I can say that the answer is no. What Eve looks like never really matters in the universe of the game. She doesn't know that she looks like this, and it doesn't suit what little there is of her personality for her to look like this. Eve is straightforward, serious, mission-focused. She's never flirtatious or irreverent, so she wouldn't be getting dressed in a bikini to go into battle, obviously. Ditto for the other female characters in the game. They don't know that they look how they look, and how they look never matters. And this lack of connection between how the characters look and how the characters act feels like another outdated element of Stellar Blade. I recently played the second part of the Final Fantasy VII remake, and in that game the characters travel to a resort town and go to the beach, and since they're at the beach they dress in swimwear, and the game uses that occasion to show you some character interactions. Cloud gets flustered when he sees the ladies, Barrett gets embarrassed wearing his sailor suit, Tifa and Aerith ask Red how they look, and in trying to compliment them he compares them to animals because he's an animal and he doesn't understand how human beauty works. Again, not saying it's Shakespeare necessarily, but how the characters look and are dressed at least exists as a thing that is acknowledged and could matter within the universe of the game. How the characters are dressed is being used as a way to show the audience more about their personalities. And I hadn't really thought about it, but I suppose at some point I got used to games that allow you to change outfits, acknowledging what you're wearing in some way. In Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, for example, characters will react to the different outfits Link wears, as well as if he talks to them while only in his underwear. And there's also certain places in the game world that Link can only access if he's wearing certain outfits. In Skyrim, the NPCs will comment on the armor set you're wearing, or tell you to put some clothes on if you walk around naked. It might not seem like much, but all this helps build the sense of the characters actually existing physically in the game world as people who can see one another, and not just as names interacting in a script. And a lack of this sort of consideration can work the other way, of course. For instance, in Stellar Blade, there's a character called Kaya who looks like she should be playing the monster in a horror movie about a haunted sex doll that murders pedophiles. Kaya runs a store called Sister's Junk, a name I was surprised to find out is not an intentional joke, and she tasks Eve with finding her sister, who's gone missing out in the desert. The sister is almost certainly dead, but Kaya maintains a childlike insistence that she's sure her sister is somehow alive. Eve goes looking for the sister, and when you find her, she is dead, oh no. Eve then has to explain to a child that her sister was killed and is never going to come home, and then attempt to console said child while dressed like this. Now, okay, to be fair, I dressed Eve like this on purpose for this mission because I thought it would be the funniest outfit to wear while breaking the news to Kaya that her sister was dead. But still, it's not like the majority of Eve's outfits are much more appropriate, is it? Stellar Blade isn't a purposefully funny game. It doesn't have a goofy or silly tone. It's most often expecting the player to take what's happening in the story rather seriously, and Eve's skimpy costumes pretty much always clash with this expectation. Now, there's a range of justifications for skimpy costumes in video games, of course. We've already mentioned Bayonetta today, and that game does have a camp, silly tone. Bayonetta isn't expecting you to take it all that seriously, and notably, Bayonetta, the character, knows that she looks like that. Her sexualization is, within the universe of the game at least, deliberate and something that is under her control. In Nier Automata, 2B's design, as well as the designs of the other androids, have been both praised and criticized. I happen to like the android designs in Nier Automata, mainly because I think they play into the twist in that game very well. The androids look like these particular idealized versions of humans, which contrasts them very sharply with the tin can looking machine enemies, and that makes it all the more surprising when the game flips the script and has you empathizing with the tin cans, often over the androids. The androids might look like humans, but it's the tin can machines talking about human concepts like love and reproduction and raising young, and there's an early game machine boss which is obsessed with looks and making herself more beautiful. It's a fun reversal of what you might expect just looking at the character designs. Of course, as well as the more defensible instances of skimpy outfits in games, we also have the ones at the bottom end of the scale. Now, one of these for me is Quiet from Metal Gear Solid 5, the silent and nearly naked sniper lady who goes out of her way to awkwardly shove her ass in your face when you're riding in the helicopter with her like she's a cat in heat or something. Although Hideo Kojima made a memorable assurance that Quiet's design made perfect sense, This turned out to be a rather arbitrary need for her to photosynthesize like a plant, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because Kojima already used the photosynthesis trait for the old Sniper Man in Metal Gear Solid 3, and he just wore clothes. Commit to the bit, you coward, and show me a 100-year-old man in a bikini. Of course, it is up to your own judgment what you think is sufficient justification for any particular character outfit or design, and if you're happy to accept actually she has to be naked because she caught clothes fall off disease, then that's up to you, honestly. I'm not going to argue with you. So where does Eve fall on this scale? Well, with Eve, there's no real attempt to ever justify or even address at all how she looks. Eve herself is a sexless character who exists in a largely sexless world. What she looks like is arbitrary. Eve's character design is almost completely divorced from any other aspect of the game. And not to get ahead of myself here, but I would argue that this lack of explanation for Eve to look the way she does is kind of the whole point. And to explain what I mean here, we can start out by looking at another tweet from Mark Kern. If you look at AAA gaming, beautiful women are the most marginalized and unrepresented segment of the market, he says, before posting a collage of video game characters that he considers to be too ugly. A collage which includes a character from Wolfenstein, Billy, who is an actual child. So Grums, Mark Kern, is here complaining about the lack of beautiful, sexy children in video games. He would like to see more of that, apparently. Very brief tangent here, but internet dickhead Dr. Disrespect recently got into some hot water due to allegations he was exchanging inappropriate messages with underage fans via a Twitch chat app, which was later revealed to, allegedly, again, be the reason he was banned from Twitch in 2020. In the wake of these allegations, Mark Kern shared a conspiracy theory on Twitter that Twitch had intentionally baited Dr. Disrespect by impersonating a minor in order to trick him into doing something they could use as a justification to ban him. Which, for one thing, I'm not sure why Twitch would engage in a conspiracy to fabricate a reason to ban one of their biggest streamers, but even if they did, I'm not sure it would be all that exonerating, would it? You know, what sort of person can be, quote, baited by someone impersonating a minor on the internet? Or indeed, what sort of person would even describe such a thing as bait? I'm not saying anything. I'm not making any allegations. Anyway, tangent over, back to this silly internet post. Firstly, of course, this is an example of cherry picking, isn't it? We've already talked about the ladies from the Final Fantasy VII Remake today, for instance, one of the biggest games of the year. But I know the response will come. That's a game from Japan, isn't it? They haven't fully caught the woke mind virus over there yet. These are all examples from Western game companies. To which I'd respond, first, Mark Kern didn't say Western, he just said AAA, so nah. But also, this is just another example of cherry picking. We've already talked about Baldur's Gate 3 today, for example, with everything going on in that game, and that was made by a Belgian company. And the Witcher series, for instance, has an array of conventionally, or even more than conventionally, I think in-universe, sometimes magically beautiful women, with romance plots and sex scenes and whatever else, and that's made by a Polish company. I mean, these are games made by Western game developers that make Stellar Blade look tame by comparison. They have romance and nudity and on-screen sex and whatever else. Stellar Blade doesn't have any of that. Anyway, the cherry picking in this image even extends down to the individual characters. For instance, taking a still from a stylized animated trailer featuring Apex Legends Lifeline rather than showing her in-game character model. Many of the characters also just are unarguably conventionally attractive. I guess Senua from Senua's Sacrifice made it on here because she's shouting. I have no idea what Jessie from Control is doing here, and I have a lumbering suspicion that many of these characters ended up on here simply for not being white. I mean, Billy Lurk from Death of the Outsider just looks like a fashion model or something in that picture. There's an obvious point about appropriateness in character design to be made here. Xenia from Assassin's Creed looks like an imposing pirate captain because she is. This other character from Rage 2, who I suspect also made it into the collage just because she's shouting, looks like some sort of post-apocalyptic Mad Max-style bandit because she is. You know, these characters look like what they are. The now classic example of appropriateness in video game character design is this Twitter post from 2021 complaining about Sony's apparently masculine-looking female protagonists. Pick from the game on the left, fan made on the right. Hire fans lol, says the poster. The picture on the left shows Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn, and the picture on the right shows an Uncanny Valley Photoshop job of Aloy with a full face of makeup and perfect teeth. So for those who don't know, Horizon Zero Dawn is set on a post-apocalyptic Earth where all modern human civilization has been destroyed, meaning it would be extremely bizarre for Aloy to look like she does on the right there. You know, she's a hunter who lives in a mountain tribe. The original image here was made as a joke on Reddit actually. It was intended to mock the sorts of people who then went on to take it seriously and say they thought it was good design. And I am interested in why someone would prefer the design on the right there, I confess, because it seems to me to be completely ridiculous, right? I logged on to nexusmods.com, which is a website that hosts mods for various video games, and I took a look at some of the popular entries for Horizon Zero Dawn. And what I found were mods to fix Aloy's face, give her whiter teeth, make her outfits more revealing, or even outright remove her clothing altogether. Now I confess I thought it would be more difficult to find these sorts of mods in the list, but they're some of the most popular ones there. If you search by the most downloaded mods of all time, Aloy Explicit Outfits, Aloy Nude Mod, and Aloy Explicit Outfits 2 are all there, and they've all been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times altogether. Unless you think this is just random base smut, Aloy Explicit Outfits comes with a small passage of fanfiction justifying itself, and I quote, "Story thus far. When Aloy was an outcast, she had trouble finding all materials for crafting her outfits. Even after she began adventuring, that curse lingered on. So whenever Aloy gets a new outfit, parts are often missing, explicitly showing her nude body. Oh well, what can Aloy do but continue on?" That's a narrative justification for nudity worthy of Hideo Kojima there. So, what's the point of fixing Aloy's appearance by changing her face, giving her makeup and skimpy outfits and so on? I'm gonna go ahead and make the assumption it's not because they believe it makes any sense from a narrative or character perspective for Aloy to be walking around talking to people with her kit off. And the latest version of this fixing of female characters' appearances is even worse. They're even doing it to Angela from the Silent Hill 2 remake, a character who is a teenager traumatized by a lifetime of physical and sexual abuse. You know, it's not just nonsensical in this example, it actually runs totally counter to the text of the game. The root cause of this expressed desire for all women in games to look like bikini models, regardless of if it makes sense or not, is usually suggested to be simple mindless horniness, right? Juvenile masturbators who want all media to resemble pornography all the time. People say, oh, you must be playing one-handed, not every woman has to be designed to give you an erection, things like that. But I think this is oversimplifying it a little. Discounting any hypothetical, actually mindlessly horny people who really are objectifying these characters for the purposes of sexual gratification, there is a stone-cold, sober, unhorny objective here for the rest of the sad gamer men. And what it's really about for them is two things, I'd argue. It's about nostalgia and control. I got thinking about these mods because with their arbitrary, seemingly nonsensical objectification, they remind me of Stellar Blade, of course. A mod that makes it so Aloy is running around the snowy mountains in a swimsuit makes about as much sense as many of Eve's outfits in Stellar Blade. And the fact that it does not make sense is important, as I said before, because it signals and amplifies the objectification of the character. The less sense it makes for a particular character to be presented in that way, like if there is nothing in their character or the story that justifies it, the more clear it is that the only reason they are being presented in that way is to appeal to a particular audience. The objectification functions as a sign above the door that says, this was made for you. You are the assumed default audience here. And this is really the desire of the regressive gamer boys, to once again be the assumed default audience for video games. They don't want to have their own desires portrayed as merely one option among many. They want their own desires to be the default, like it was in the past. More traditional conservatives might complain about having to press a button to select their own language on a telephone, and what we've been talking about today follows a similar logic. The rose-tinted past that the Gamergate crowd are nostalgic for is one in which all gamers were assumed to be straight men, and if women were there at all, it was to take their clothes off. There's a close association between young cis-het men being the assumed default video game audience and the objectification of women in games, one with roots not just in how many video games used to be designed, but also how they were advertised and talked about in the gaming press. If you're of a certain age, you might remember the way video game magazines used to be, assuming all gamers are straight men and women are sex objects used to advertise the games. Video games and other nerdy hobbies are sometimes seen as an escape from a misogynist, toxic masculinity for sensitive boys who are above that sort of thing, but that's not always the case, is it? Nerdy hobbies can be every bit as objectifying and exclusionary as any others. A lot of this sort of advertising portrays games not as an escape from traditional masculinity, but as another avenue to reaching it. Play this game to get the girl, to be a tough guy, to prove you're not gay or whatever. I don't know how much I'd commit to saying the roots of Gamergate were in this sort of environment, but at least one root was probably dangling somewhere nearby. This era is what the Gamergate crowd see as the golden age. This is what they want to return to. So I would argue that the point of fixing female characters' appearances to make them more objectified is much less about the simple desire to see a sexy lady, and more about changing the products those characters feature in into something that appears to have been designed as if they were the exclusive audience. What they want is to be pandered to. Objectification is just the way they see that pandering being conveyed, and if the developers choose not to pander to them by objectifying their female characters, they have to fix it. So it's less about jacking off and more about trying to transport themselves back in time to when games were just for them and Crash Bandicoot had 4 sexy girlfriends. Now if all this sounds like a bold claim, let me see if I can justify it with another example. You see, running alongside this very one-sided discourse cycle about Stellar Blade were various other one-sided discourse cycles related to Supergiant Games' early access release of Hades 2, which came out in May of this year. This is the sequel to Hades, which came out in 2020, which is an absolutely excellent roguelike action game with a brilliant story and characters and character designs. I really like Hades. It's one of the best games I've played in the last few years, and I'm very excited about the full release of Hades 2 when that comes out. If you've not played Hades, go and give it a go. Now, for those who don't know, Hades is a story set in the underworld of Greek mythology, and as such Greek gods and mythological figures make up the cast of characters. The early access release of Hades 2 introduced some previously unseen characters to the cast, as well as showing some updated character designs for the returning characters. Of course, the fake outrage clickbait merchants on YouTube watch every new game release like a hawk, looking to see if they can brand a game either woke or anti-woke to get a desperate little discourse cycle out of it. And let's look at a few they managed to toss off for Hades 2. So first up is Hephaestus.
This time around, the game doesn't only promote gender ideology, it also goes out of its way to promote racial and body diversity as well. I mean, why would a god be in a wheelchair?
Yes, because I'm sure gods are just fat, frumpy weirdos who can't fucking walk and have to travel around in wheelchairs, even though they can control anything about anyone. They have to be in wheelchairs because they can't walk. Yes, I'm sure that makes perfect sense in your absolute small brain, low IQ head of yours. I'm sure it does.
But the wheelchair? He's a god. Hephaestus is a god. Why is he in a wheelchair?
But these are some of the characters here, and obviously all of the games journalists are soy-facing over this because of the fact that now they have a Greek god in a wheelchair. I'm really glad to see everybody pretty much calling this shit out and saying how fucking ridiculous this is.
So yes, Supergiant Games had the temerity, the gall, to put a god in a wheelchair. What sort of a god would need to be in a wheelchair? Now, this video is long enough already, so I'll try not to belabor the point, but firstly, Hephaestus is the ancient Greek god of blacksmiths, carpenters, craftsmen and the likes. He makes things, basically. He's also described as limping on account of having a lame leg, which in different tellings either caused him to be cast off Mount Olympus, or was caused by injuries he sustained in being cast off Mount Olympus. So Hephaestus has a disability, canonically, in the ancient Greek sources. But he's a god, you might say. Can't he just fix it with magic god powers? And no, the second thing you need to know here is that the gods in Greek mythology are not omniscient or omnipotent. They're not all powerful, they can't just do whatever they want. Now, of course, this combination of a god who both has a disability and is a great inventor has given rise to modern portrayals of Hephaestus as having created mobility aids for himself. It's sort of an obvious way to portray the character, right? So obvious, in fact, that it was obvious to the ancient Greeks, who portrayed Hephaestus in a wheelchair. He made himself a winged chariot thing with wheels that he used to travel around, and some depictions of Hephaestus have him using this wheeled chair. So the depiction in Hades 2 of Hephaestus in a wheelchair is totally fine, accurate to some ancient Greek depictions even. I don't want to be too mean to Asmongold and the other whiny gamer boys here, so I'll just say, read a book sometime. You ignorant, snivelling worms. Or even do a basic Google search before you turn your mic on and just start saying whatever old shit off the top of your head. It's embarrassing. Anyway, that was Bullshit Hades Discourse number 1. Who's up for Bullshit Hades Discourse number 2? This one had to do with the design for Hestia. So, in Greek mythology, Hestia is the elder sibling of Zeus. She is the goddess of the hearth and the home, and is depicted tending to the hearth fire on Olympus. And we see Hestia in Hades 2 here has a fire poker, a crown of coals, hot coal earrings. She's very fireplace themed in general, and she's an older lady, being older than Zeus, as we said. In terms of character, she's presented like a kindly grandmother type. She's warm, you could say, and in terms of gameplay, she grants you fire-based attacks that burn your enemies. She contrasts well with Demeter, her sister and another elder sibling of Zeus. Demeter is portrayed as an older lady who's very stern and cold, and who grants you frost attacks that freeze your enemies. You see, their designs not only reflect their personalities and their role in the story, but also how they function in terms of gameplay. It's character design. So, why are we talking about Hestia? Well, on the 7th of May, very strange Twitter account V made the following post. I am unironically not buying Hades 2. The people who made Hestia just committed a crime against nature. They are so phenomenally shit at their job, and by existing in the industry they are taking away the position of someone more talented. And V attaches an image which contrasts a quote Greek depiction of Hestia with Hestia quote according to America, that's the design from Hades 2, and Hestia according to Japan, showing an anime girl. This post was later shared by Mark Kern, who added the statement that quote anime Hestia is the best girl. I thought long and hard about when it would be funniest to reveal to you how old Mark Kern is, but it's probably right here after he says anime Hestia is the best girl. How old would you reckon he is, if you had to guess? You might say, well, you mentioned he worked at Blizzard in the early 2000s, so say if he was in his 20s then, that would mean he's in his 40s now. That's a bit old, isn't it, to be saying things like anime Hestia is the best girl? And it would be, yes. And also, Mark Kern is 56 years old. 56 he is. I feel too old to be talking about some of this nonsense, and he's old enough to be my dad. Anyway, who is this best girl anime Hestia? Well, she's a character from Danjon ni Dei o Matomoro no wa Machigate iru Daroka, aka Danmachi in English, is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon? Probably. Out of another sense of due diligence, I watched a few episodes of this anime, and I can report back that it's your standard shallowly horny fantasy thing. If you want a one-sentence review, Danmachi, it's as generic as they come. There you go. The world of Danmachi features various god characters who've come to Earth to mingle with humans, each leading a retinue of adventurers who explore a dungeon and fight monsters, or something. The main character is the sole follower of anime Hestia there, and she's in love with him and gets jealous when he talks to other women. That's their deal. Character design-wise, anime Hestia is pretty basic, I think it's fair to say. Her clothes are a bit torn at the edges there, she's got some ribbons. That's about it. Well, actually, the fan wiki for Danmachi points out that she's also known for having large breasts. really pushing the boat out there in terms of anime girl design, aren't they? Breaking new ground. And what does her design have to do with the Greek Hestia, really? She's supposed to be the elder sibling of Zeus, but he appears in Danmachi as an older man with a grey beard. So why is anime Hestia designed like this? He asks, facetiously. Well, for reasons of fan service, obviously. The fans of this sort of thing are a bunch of horny little goblins, and this design is saying, do not worry, horny little goblins, this product was made with you as the target audience. Which, you know, whatever, I'm not going to shame the horny little goblins. They can like whatever they like. What I would impress upon them, though, is that when you see a character design that was not created with your particular brand of juvenile horniness as its prime consideration, that doesn't mean it was a mistake. In fact, it was almost certainly not a mistake. Hestia from Hades 2 is a really bad design if the target audience is anime perverts whose favourite character is nicknamed Lolly Big Boobs. But it isn't, thank God. Hestia from Hades 2 had a rather different design brief, I would imagine. The third bullshit Hades 2 discourse cycle I'll talk about today is the most interesting and relevant for us and has to do with Aphrodite, who is of course the ancient Greek goddess of love and fertility. Like the other characters, Aphrodite's design reflects her personality and role in the story. It has a lot of love hearts and roses. She's a conventionally beautiful woman whose gameplay power is to weaken and charm enemies so they either do less damage to you or they fight on your side. So she's seductive and charming. Character design again. She is also, you might have noticed, almost completely naked. So, almost completely naked, conventionally attractive lady. This is exactly what the anti-woke outrage gamers claim to want to see. So you'd imagine they'd be pretty happy about this design, right? Well, on April 19th, Kotaku published an article written by Alyssa Mercante entitled Hades 2 is the kind of hot we need right now, which praises Hades 2 for the diversity and depth of its character designs. And now this article caught some flack from the sad gamer men by making comparisons between the characters of Hades 2 and Eve from Stellar Blade. The article calls Eve's design bland by comparison to the Hades characters, which is of course entirely correct. Now it should be noted here that the complaint about the character design is not solely about looks. It's not how Eve looks, it's that it doesn't suit her character or role in the story for her to look the way she does. Whereas it does suit Aphrodite's personality and her role in the story for her to look the way she does. This was always the point being made with regards to Eve from Stellar Blade, by the way. If all you have is the looks, but there's no character there backing that up, it's boring. That's the problem with Eve's design. It's not that she's hot, it's that she's boring. Of course, the outrage merchants missed this point, either on purpose or out of ignorance, and made a whole bunch of videos highlighting the supposed hypocrisy, or hypocrisy even, of Kotaku saying that one of these designs was good and the other was bad. But I'm not all that interested in that point, they're just obviously responding to an argument that wasn't actually made. What I'm interested in here is that these videos gave the opportunity for the video makers to comment on Aphrodite's design.
So this whole time, the lefties didn't take an issue with fan service or the male gaze. They just wanted all the male gaze to be towards queer characters, queer identity, and what they find attractive.
I feel like there's a little bit of hypocrisy going on right here. Is it because Hephaestus is fat and disabled and checks off all the echo boxes? Is it because this person has a pointy-ass Pinocchio nose?
We got our female characters with the manly jawline. We got Aphrodite with a masculine face and masculine features.
It's a manly face. It's probably a trans woman.
You know what they call T-coded, like transcoded T-coded? That's what I get from that. It's like a T-coded design. It's like feminine body, masculine, vaguely.
The face is androgynous.
Face. Yeah,
androgynous. Yeah.
Those are some reactions to Aphrodite's design from both Hades 1 and 2 there. Around this time, Mark Kern shared an attempt to fix Aphrodite's Hades 1 design on Twitter, a picture which removes her prominent cheekbones, makes her thinner, thins her eyebrows, and so on. And Kern says, removing the man face makes a huge difference, but wokies don't get excited unless a character looks trans. So I have a few things to say about this. Firstly, you might be tempted to see all this as simple knee-jerk contrarianism, right? Since a Kotaku journalist praised Aphrodite's design, they now have to dislike the design on principle. And I'm sure that's part of it. But I also do think that the inclusion of a more diverse range of body types really does alter their perception of the character designs that in other contexts would more usually appeal to them. The problem is, as the Kotaku article points out, variety and choice. You see, it's not enough for the anti-woke gamer types for a game to have something that appeals to them. The game needs to only have things that appeal to them, exclusively. If it's got something else, it's almost like it cancels out. Just as they take objectification and the lack of diversity as a sign the product is for them, the presence of diversity, variety, and choice is a sign which says to them, this was not made for you. So the inclusion of character designs like Hephaestus and Hestia really does alter their perception of Aphrodite. They now second-guess themselves with regards to her design. They can't trust the developers anymore to solely pander to them. So even this very feminine design of a conventionally beautiful naked lady reads as masculine and ugly to them. Of course, if all the characters were conventionally attractive naked ladies, they'd think the game was great, but it really does have to be all, not just some. It's not that their tastes are not included here, they are, it's that they've excluded themselves. As a side note here, one surprising thing I saw watching videos about this was some people who appeared to be confused about the Hades series going woke.
Did these guys read the dialogues from the first game, or did they just keep hitting everything they saw in front of them? Hades has been queer as F since the first game. I played the first game quite a bit. I got close to beating it, put in probably a dozen hours, talked to all the side characters. I really enjoyed the first game despite its shortcomings. And yet I didn't get this whole super queer LGBT, alphabet mafia vibe. Apparently I wasn't paying attention.
What do you mean you didn't get queer vibes from Hades? It's Greek for a start. The main character's bisexual. There's a whole gay romance story about reuniting Achilles and Patroclus. The character Chaos is genderless. You can start a polyamorous relationship. No, you weren't paying attention. Anyway, back to fixing Aphrodite's design. Similar to fixing Aloy's design, there's a problem here, isn't there, to do with the categorization of certain facial features, prominent cheekbones and jawlines and so on, as necessarily masculine. So just for the anti-woke gamer boys today, I'm going to introduce a new video feature which I'm sure is going to be a big hit. Okay, let's play. Let's look at some women. And here are the women we're going to be looking at today. Olivia Wilde, Liv Tyler, Angelina Jolie, Keira Knightley. Some women there. I hope you see my point here. Also, those aren't random women, obviously. They are famous celebrities, commonly cited as being among the most attractive people on the planet. It's kind of sad that my version of a reality check for the gamer guys is showing them Hollywood celebrities, isn't it? I think if they went for a walk in a public park, their heads would probably explode. Also, there's a further disturbing tendency here, which is the conflation of certain common adult facial features with common masculine facial features, and then using that designation to brand adult women who have those features as unfeminine or ugly. When, no, some women have prominent cheekbones, prominent jawlines. There is nothing necessarily gendered or even to do with attractiveness about those features. The problem with Hades 2, of course, is choice. It's diversity. It's that there is more than just the one thing on offer. And this answers my question about Baldur's Gate 3 from earlier, by the way, because while yes, in that game you can play a straight-down-the-line heterosexual cisgender man and pursue a relationship with a conventionally attractive woman, you have to select that option. You have to be involved in the process to declare your own desires. You have to press 1 for English, basically. The anti-woke gamer men we're talking about today don't want that. They don't want to be a part of diversity, they want to be separate from and superior to it. Again, we're talking less about sex or sexuality and more about who media is being made for. For the anti-woke crowd, this is what is actually attractive about Stellar Blade. It's not the sex, because there isn't any, and it's not the romance, because there isn't any, and it's not even the sexualization, really, in isolation, because they will turn on a game with sexualized characters if they perceive it to be too diverse or inclusive. It's the lack of diversity and the objectification. It's a fine line between definitions here, but there are certain conservatives who dislike sex and sexuality in media because they view it as a kind of modern moral degeneracy, but they do like the objectification of women because that reinforces a conservative hierarchy. And this objectification doesn't necessarily mean sexualizing women in the way you might expect. In fact, it can even come in the form of the desexualization of women. Less important than the sexualization itself is that women do not have agency, that they are there to be objects acted upon by men. And just as this can take the form of telling women to get their tits out, it can also take the form of telling women to cover up and be ashamed. These are just two sides of the same coin, really. The important thing is that women are being told what to do, and not choosing for themselves. So women should conform to certain beauty standards, but in an automatic and unconscious sort of way, because the conscious choosing of those standards requires women to have a level of agency that socially conservative men find unacceptable. And Eve is perfect here, of course, because while she looks like a bikini model, she has absolutely zero idea that she does. She and the rest of Stellar Blade's female characters didn't choose to look the way they do, they just look like that, for zero in-universe reason. And the socially conservative gamers took this to be a political statement on behalf of the game's developers. Stellar Blade must be intentionally on our side, they thought, deliberately championing our cause. It must be making a political point with its scantily clad ladies. Now, just to clarify here, it isn't. Stellar Blade makes zero intentional statements about real-world society or politics, and certainly doesn't offer any opinions about silly culture war nonsense. As far as I can tell, Eve is designed the way she is because her designers like looking at bikini ladies, and they didn't really think about it harder than that. Eve's design certainly doesn't seem to be intended as any sort of intentional cultural statement. Nevertheless, in the run-up to Stellar Blade's release, the Gamergate remnants went to lengths to try to divine this intention from the game's marketing and social media posts. For example, about a week before Stellar Blade came out on the 21st of April, the Stellar Blade account on Twitter posted, "Stellar Blade offers the same uncensored version in all countries, including the Japanese version." And then they posted the same message in Japanese. Now, seeing this in isolation, you might assume it to be a message intended to assure prospective Japanese buyers of the game that the version of Stellar Blade released in their country was not going to be censored. You see, you might know that Japan's Computer Entertainment Rating Organization is relatively strict on new game releases compared to ratings agencies in other countries. For example, they censored some of the violence and sexual content in The Last of Us Part 2, and they've previously refused to issue ratings to games that feature violent content, like Dead Space and the Callisto Protocol, to name a couple of examples. So this tweet was clearly intended to dispel worries that their Japanese audience might have about receiving a censored product, you might think. But no, it turns out this tweet wasn't about that. It was actually Stellar Blade giving a middle finger to the woke. That's right, just before the game releases, there's barely enough time to squeeze in one more discourse cycle about Stellar Blade versus the woke mob. Stellar Blade uncensored worldwide, Shift Up announces amidst puritanical and feminist criticism. Stellar Blade scores massive win against the woke. Game will be uncensored for the entire world. I can't be censored, says Eve. I like this video thumbnail, which has Eve flipping off the other person there. Someone who I guess we're supposed to infer is a woke person who really wants Stellar Blade to be censored. Can you believe these sorts of video thumbnails are still being pumped out, by the way? I saw a channel while making this video that was created 3 years ago and has 2,500 videos on it. That is multiple per day, and all of them are exactly the same, and all of them have thumbnails like this. You know, with all the stock woke stand-in characters they've been using for 10 years now. Can you imagine making multiple of these a day? Forever. It's like a horrible recursive nightmare. Anyway, this rather generous extrapolation of the tweet about censorship cemented Stellar Blade's reputation as the anti-woke flagship game of the moment. Stellar Blade is refusing to be censored. It's taking a stand against the woke. It's gonna take us back to the past and make video games great again. Now, unfortunately, something happened to interrupt this rather premature victory lap. Stellar Blade came out. Oh no. What's this? Stellar Blade censored on day one? Gamers are pissed? Stellar Blade censored now? They betrayed us? PSN accounts cancelled over Stellar Blade censorship? Well now, what's happened here then? Let's go to our reporter live on the scene, Mark Kern, and see if we can figure out what's going on. More rumours coming in about Stellar Blade as the situation is organic. People are reporting that these outfit nerfs were weeks before the day one patch. There's speculation that the more risque versions of the outfits may be New Game Plus unlocks, but there is no confirmation yet. Taking down the Stellar Blade outfit post until I can get more confirmation. Stellar Blade needs to release a statement now. I'm waiting for more confirmation tonight/tomorrow. Thinking is better than reacting. Took down my tag post of Stellar Blade. Let's see what happens tomorrow. As more information comes to light, I'm taking down my tweet about should I buy Stellar Blade until I see full confirmations tomorrow. One thing to be aware of is that there are people who want Stellar Blade to fail. There can and will be misinformation posted, so we should all be vigilant. They want those pre-orders cancelled. And as I've pointed out before, in corporate warfare, the bad actors can be rival company PR firms. Be careful. I posted before I had the full story, but took it down within minutes. We'll be more careful next time. It's not looking good. Here are the screenshots and build numbers from Reddit user DewShelter1349. Same outfit. Censored. Uh-oh. It looks like Stellar Blade was censored, and you can see the horrifying effects of that censorship there. It's unrecognizable, isn't it? It's like a completely different game now. A little bit more fabric has been added to one of Eve's outfits. But wait, if you can believe it, things get even worse. This is another confirmed outfit censored in Stellar Blade, original on left. We're working on changing it back. Who are you? It's not about inches of fabric, it's about fighting the double standard and getting Stellar Blade customers what was advertised. Hashtag free Stellar Blade. Now then, I have a lot of things I find funny about this. Number one, it is very funny that Mark Kern decided to talk about all this in the manner of a news reporter breaking a story about Air Force One going missing or something. Like it's a developing situation that we need to be careful how we talk about. Very good. I love that. Secondly, there are outfits in Stellar Blade which are still much more revealing than any of the quote censored outfits, which leads me to believe the outfits were not in fact censored and were merely changed in the course of the game's development, something which the Shift Up developers later stated was the case. Also, the scale of these outfit changes is so minor. From how Mark Kern's talking about it, you'd think Shift Up swapped Eve from a bikini to a nun's habit or something. So actually, while we talk about this, I'm going to leave a couple of GIFs of these outfit changes on the screen, just so we don't lose perspective on what exactly it is we're talking about here. Next, I think it is completely hilarious that Mark Kern is up in arms about Stellar Blade customers, quote, not getting what was advertised, given that his job is selling skins for a video game that doesn't even exist. And you'd think that he would understand how this sort of thing works, given that he's a game developer himself, remember? For example, Mark, have a look at this. Here's the Ember Twitter account advertising an in-game character skin for purchase, represented by a 3D character model of a cat girl. It's a mock-up because there is no game to put her in yet, of course. The thing is, though, you had already sold access to this skin before, when it was represented by 2D character art. And the earlier version of the skin, which you sold on your website for money, is more revealing than the newer version. Look how much more thigh is showing in the earlier version of the skin. You sold this, and then you changed it to be less revealing. So can we get a discourse cycle out of this, maybe? Hashtag free Ember, perhaps? Because this is exactly what you're criticising Shift Up for doing. Well, it's not exactly the same, I suppose, because their game actually came out, didn't it? Next, I really appreciate that this air quote censorship controversy came so quickly after the Twitter post which stated the game would not be censored. Shift Up unintentionally caught the anti-woke culture war YouTubers off balance there. They were led into seeing Stellar Blade's uncensored release as a victory over the imaginary woke mob they were pretending were trying to censor the game, but then the game came out and it was censored. Or at least they thought it was, which turned their fake victory into a real defeat. They built this imaginary woke strawman that was trying to censor Stellar Blade, and then it won. So I'll claim that victory then on behalf of the woke mob. Well done, everyone. We won that one, and we didn't even have to do anything. Congratulations. Now, one of Mark Kern's tweets there talked about changing Stellar Blade back and said #free Stellar Blade. So let's talk about that. You see, in the wake of all this traumatizing news, Mark Kern posted a change.org petition with the aim of getting Shift Up to revert the outfit changes to the versions shown in the game's trailer. And let's read that page together. Stellar Blade is a phenomenal new game that just launched on PlayStation 5 worldwide. But it has a problem. The content has been censored from the original trailer version posted by Sony. We, as gamers, want this content back. We relied on it. We made the game the #1 pre-order worldwide because of it, and this is the true game we want. What do you mean you relied on it? You relied on this. Stellar Blade is more than a game. It's become a cultural beacon for freedom of expression in a time where game publishers like Sony are censoring games more than ever. Stellar Blade was a breath of fresh air, and Gamer rallied behind it because it meant things were changing, getting better, and the voice of creative freedom was ringing loud and clear. Beautiful. Notice here how Mark Kern is avoiding saying that Sony censored the game, because of course he has absolutely no evidence that that is true, so he has to say things like game publishers like Sony are censoring games in general. Talking about creative freedom and freedom of expression is also funny because 1, I didn't see you talking about that when you were sharing edits made to the work of other game designers, and 2, of course, the only word out of Shift Up so far is that they wanted to make these changes. They said this is the final version of the game they wanted to make, and you're the one trying to make them change it. Now, Mark Kern had 2 paths forward at this point. Either he could accept what Shift Up said about not being censored and cut his losses, or he could spiral into delusion and conspiracy theories. I wonder what he did. First, they tried to search ban me. Now they're stopping #free Stellar Blade from trending. Who are they supposed to be here, even? Tell me again this is just about some silly video game controversy. These people are very threatened by the normal sexuality that Stellar Blade represents. That is definitely the word that comes to mind for all of this. Sign the petition. It's important. It really isn't. You see, even though Shift Up said Stellar Blade is not being censored, it is being censored, we just don't know how, and whoever did it is so powerful that they can somehow force Shift Up to lie about being censored, as well as force Twitter to limit Mark Kern's social media reach, all in the name of destroying normal sexuality, represented here of course by maybe an inch of fabric on a video game bikini. And sadly, this campaign of censorship didn't stop there. On the 24th of May, patch 1.003 for Stellar Blade was released. This patch added new content to the game, including 2 new Kunoichi outfits. Now, even though these outfits were only obtainable after the patch, 1.0 versions of the outfits existed in the game files, and those outfits were slightly different. Do not panic, however. The website freestellarblade.com has a little write-up on the changes and a guide to accessing the original versions of the outfits, and I quote, "The skirt on the Kunoichi nanosuits were lengthened and made more rigid in version 1.003. The skirt's transparency decreased in version 1.003. Changes were made to Eve's body structure from version 1.0 to version 1.003. The Kunoichi nanosuits are available on the disc. To access them, you need to have Roxanne's affinity maxed out Then you would need to up patch to version 1.003. As soon as you load into the game, you should receive a prompt with the rewards. Immediately back out of the game and down patch to avoid save file incompatibility. I just thought I'd give that a signal boost here so we can all get access to the earlier versions of the outfits. It certainly looks worth the effort, doesn't it? Now, this patch also added in 2 other outfits for Eve, Midsummer Alice and Midsummer Red Hood. These are 2 variants of 2 of the controversially changed outfits we've been talking about. The Red Hood outfit swaps Eve's undershirt for a body harness and adds thigh-high stockings, and the Alice outfit adds in a bow, a collar, and some lights down the front. So these are new outfits, but they are also clearly iterations on the earlier versions of the supposedly censored outfits that Mark Kern and the Horny Goblins are upset about. Now this introduced a little awkwardness into the Free Stellar Blade movement. You see, Shift Up added in 2 outfits, which are kinda like the ones we said we wanted, so we could claim that as a win, but also, they didn't uncensor anything that we wanted them to uncensor. These are new outfits, they didn't change the old ones, and all the rest of the outfits we're upset about are still censored, supposedly, so what should we do? FreeStellarBlade.com is very clear about where they stand on the update. Do not accept these outfits as a win. The entire point of this is freedom of artistic expression. There's now 12 outfits that are censored with the latest update. So that's where they are. Mark Kern, however, decided to split with FreeStellarBlade.com and took a rather different approach. We did it! You did it! Hashtag FreeStellarBlade celebrates as Shift Up and Stellar Blade uncensor outfits. Thank you everyone who participated in the 8-step plan and the petition. Please sign the petition, which will now be sent as a gift to Shift Up. Lucky them. So many have helped to make this possible. Everyone worked so very hard. That's right, we did it. Stellar Blade has released 2 new outfits for the game, and that means we win. That's what we were asking for all along, of course. 2 new outfits, and we got them. In my favourite history podcast, The History of Rome, host Mike Duncan has a recurring joke about generals and emperors who would extract themselves from an unwinnable military situation by simply declaring victory and going home, and this is the culture war version of that, basically. Even though 0 of our original concerns were addressed, we won. And the replies to this tweet are quite funny. We've won nothing. The original censorship is still there, but they've won from your reaction. No, they know they can bribe us and distract us. Your reaction means we've lost. You are wrong, they added outfits in order to distract from your real intention, which is that they are actually just keep spitting on the fans by continuing to censor the game diligently. They are insulting the player's intelligence by thinking we wouldn't notice. Look for yourself, we have nothing to celebrate. It only get worse. Discord in the ranks here. Now the latest twist in this tale is that Shift Up recently went public and posted a job listing for an investor relations manager, one of the duties of which is overseeing the publication of ESG reports. Now you might say, Sean, I don't know what that is, or how it could possibly matter. But no, it does matter, it turns out. Shift Up sells out and embraces ESG. Stellar Blade is doomed. Stellar Blade developer Shift Up goes public, will now publish ESG reports. Stellar Blade sells out to ESG. Shift Up goes public and becomes compromised. And so on and so forth. Also, this news led Mark Kern to rather dramatically declare that Shift Up has fallen. After going public, they will be required to publish ESG reports. So okay, what the hell are ESG reports? Well, ESG is one of those acronyms, along with DEI, that 2 online right-wingers have come to see as a synonym for wokeness. It stands for Environmental, Social and Governance, and ESG reports basically detail the environmental and social impact of the practices of the company. Now, I have my own anti-capitalist opinions about the actual point of this sort of thing, of course, but I can relay that the nominal point of this sort of thing is to attract socially conscious investment. Invest in us not just because we're a good financial investment, but because we are good for society, that sort of thing. Of course, even the mildest corporate overture towards any sort of social responsibility is read as Marxist infiltration by the sorts of people who see Marxist infiltration everywhere they look. And so Shift Up hiring someone whose job will be, in part, to publish ESG reports is seen as necessarily compromising. They have caught the woke mind virus, in other words. Alas, they were supposed to save our culture with their video game bikini ladies, but it turns out that was probably just a really strange thing to expect. Something that jumped out at me watching dozens and dozens of horrible videos over the course of making this horrible video was how few of these video game commentator channels seem to be run by people who actually play the games they're talking about. I saw a lot of people not just talking about how great Stellar Blade is without having played it, but talking about Hades without having played it, Baldur's Gate without having played it, and so on. Like, I didn't play Hades, and I have no plans to play Hades 2, but I'm outraged about these Hades character designs, and, like, why? Well, we know why, don't we? People like Mark Kern and the YouTubers who make these videos are outraged tourists. They don't really care about what they're talking about, they just want attention. And something happened quite late in the production of this video which illustrates this point rather nicely, which is a little annoying as I now have to add this part you're hearing right now into an already long video, but on the other hand, it is a good example. So on the 20th of August, Mark Kern posted the following tweet about an upcoming game in the Monster Hunter series, Monster Hunter Wilds. And he says, "What happened to Capcom? From Monster Hunter Worlds to Monster Hunter Wilds." And then he posts 2 pictures comparing 2 seemingly random characters from those 2 games. The Handler from 2018's Monster Hunter Worlds, and a new character called Olivia, shown here in a frame from the 3rd trailer for Monster Hunter Wilds, which was also released on the 20th of August. The intent here was obviously to get another "they're turning the beautiful ladies into ugly ladies" discourse cycle started, but this one was thankfully killed before it got off the ground. Monster Hunter fans ruthlessly mocked Kern and his silly cherry picking until he was forced to delete the tweet. Kern then posted another tweet about Monster Hunter Wilds saying, "Took down the Capcom tweet, Monster Hunter Wilds is safe, my bad," and he attaches a picture of Gemma, another Monster Hunter Wilds character, who he apparently does find attractive. Good for him. But Kern has accidentally revealed something here. You see, Gemma was shown in the first Monster Hunter Wilds trailer, which was released back in May. Any Monster Hunter fan paying attention to Monster Hunter Wilds would already be aware of this character, so Kern doesn't know what he's talking about here clearly. But even worse, Gemma also shows up in the 3rd trailer, the one featuring Olivia, the character Mark Kern was complaining about in his tweet, so he must not have seen it. He's only seen this screenshot. So it's not just that Mark Kern isn't some big Monster Hunter fan, he hasn't even seen the trailer that he's complaining about. Kern and the outraged tourist YouTubers like to complain that their hobby has been infiltrated by fake fans, but that's all projection. It's them. They're the ones pretending to be fans of video games for attention on the internet. Now, it wouldn't really be right for me to armchair psychoanalyze people based on just a few tweets or YouTube videos, of course. But if I was going to, watching a lot of these videos, I'd say I saw a lot of people who seem to have lost their passion for their hobby. They've got bored, but they aren't moving on. And this is a thing that happens sometimes. Someone was into a thing when they were young and carefree, but now they're older and more cynical, and they're not really having fun anymore. But instead of moving on and trying something new, they get angry. This thing is part of my identity. It's not that my earlier appreciation for the thing was that I was excited about having new experiences, it's that the thing was good, and now it's bad. So someone ruined it, and I'm gonna moan at whoever I reckon that was. What a lot of these commentators seemed to want from Stellar Blade was for it to take them back to the good old days, before all this politics and wokeness, a simpler time where you could leave your door unlocked, and you couldn't move for video game bikini ladies. This is of course just the video game version of the standard conservative nostalgia for a past that doesn't really exist. You know, the world was a brighter, happier place back when I was an actual child and didn't have to pay rent or know about wars. What a coincidence. For any of these people who are watching this video and have actually stuck around to the end, which I seriously doubt, I'm going to do a bit of a selfless public service right now and go back over what we've talked about today and explain what was actually happening. Okay, so first of all, individual video game journalists are not generally in the business of trying to destroy video games. Reporting on video games is how they get paid, after all. They might call certain games or gaming tropes bad, but that's just their own opinion as critics and reviewers. They're not trying to hurt you. It's got nothing to do with you, in fact. They're actually trying to make games better, according to their opinion of what better is anyway, but that's not to spite you. Again, it's got nothing to do with you. That's just what their opinion is. Next, big mainstream video game journalism outlets are not generally in the business of trying to destroy video games, especially video games from big publishers like Sony. They make money from running ads on content related to game releases. IGN, for instance, makes guides and videos about Stellar Blade. That's part of how they make money. For this reason, mainstream journalism outlets actually tend to be rather generous with review scores for big game releases, because publishers pay to advertise on their platforms, so they have an incentive to stay on friendly terms with the publishers. And of course, if a mainstream journalism outlet was trying to destroy a video game, they wouldn't bury that attempt in an otherwise positive demo preview on a single foreign language website, would they? Next, if a video game company does censor violent or sexual content, it is vastly more likely that decision is being motivated by getting particular ratings from media ratings agencies, rather than anything to do with some amorphous idea of wokeness, i.e. it's mostly being driven by older socially conservative people and capitalist financial incentives, not blue-haired feminists on the internet. If some ratings agency says you need to tone down the violence or sex or change the blood to be green or whatever, or you don't get to release in our country and therefore potentially lose profits, some companies will do it. But that's got shit all to do with wokeness. And that's the next point, of course. There wasn't some big woke mob push to ban or censor Stellar Blade. A couple of journalists criticised some aspects of the character designs in the game, because it's their job to give their opinions about video games, and that is the full extent of what actually happened there. The narrative about the woke mob coming for sexy ladies in video games used to be built on cherry-picking and misrepresentation, only watching very particular sentences of Anita Sarkeesian videos and the likes, but today it's more like an ancient superstition or something. We are long past the point where that argument was centre stage now. The industry and the discourse are both moving on. The woke mob isn't coming to try and take Stellar Blade away, because, to be blunt, Stellar Blade's character designs don't really matter all that much. The argument really was about a lack of diversity in character designs, and Stellar Blade's style of character design just isn't as prominent and overrepresented as it once was. This isn't a two-sided culture war battle anymore, if indeed it ever was. It's the outraged tourists versus their own imaginations. Next, I have a note about concepts of attractiveness here. Now, this goes beyond the remit of talking about video games, of course, but watching all these videos, I heard a lot of talk that was very obviously coming from people who just assumed that they were the default type of person, and that only people who are like them play video games, and furthermore that any attempt to appeal to people who are not exactly like them must be some evil scheme or other. I heard a lot of gamers want this is what gamers want to see, when what they really mean is, this is what I want to see. It's a very basic point, but there is a much wider range of what people are attracted to than what you're attracted to or what you see as the default. There are people who are attracted to a whole range of appearances, body types, fashions, whatever else, and some of them are even attracted to that part of the range that is more traditionally considered to be unattractive. Something which a lot of the people whose videos I was watching could probably stand to appreciate a little more, shall we say. Also, when you see big corporations diversify their products and publish reports about the social impact of their activities and market their products to multiple target demographics, do you know why they do that? It's to make money. Big corporations aren't trying to usher in some Marxist takeover of society. Unfortunately, they're trying to get paid, so they market their products to appeal to a wide variety of people. What you see as going woke is, when it comes to big corporations, mostly just a profit-motivated diversification. They want diverse demographics to feel included, sure, but that's because they want to sell products to those people. There's no need to go on the hunt for the shadowy Marxist puppet masters pulling the strings of society when actually the things that you're annoyed about are being caused by boring old capitalist economic incentives. The right are in kind of an awkward spot here because of course they can't say they think capitalism is bad, but also they hate diversity. So if a profit-motivated capitalist corporation diversifies its products to target a wider audience, they're kind of in a bind. They can't call that out for what it actually is, so they have to sub in the spectre of communism and blame that instead. Not to go off on another tangent right at the end here, but I guess part of the issue is that the right see capitalism as something close to human nature, the system that best reflects humans at their default. And I suppose if you believe that, and also you're socially conservative, you'd expect capitalism to produce products that were narrowly targeted towards each type of person, and those products to be consumed by that type of person. And of course, the gamers we've been talking about today thought that video games fulfilled that role for them. So faced with inclusive media featuring a diverse cast of characters targeted at a wide range of different people and that media being successful, that's a challenge to the whole conservative worldview right there. Probably even more so in the cases where the diversity is merely profit-motivated tokenism, because that communicates that even the cynical capitalists have calculated that enough people like diversity to justify making diverse products. If there was more money in producing only regressive, non-inclusive, narrowly targeted content, they'd be doing it, but since they're not, that means the conservatives must either be wrong about people or wrong about capitalism. But that can't be true, so enter the cultural Marxist puppet masters perverting the true course of history or whatever. Now the annoying thing here is that this push to make products that appeal to different demographics is one of the more benign economic incentives driving corporate decision making. But some other economic incentives really are hurting gaming. Right now, a lot of gaming conservatives have the strange idea that if a game or gaming company or journalism outfit fails, it's only because it's gone woke. This is a worldview sustained with a constant regimen of confirmation bias, where all examples that don't work are either ignored or attributed to conspiracy theories. But in truth, it often doesn't matter how well things are doing. You can have the most profitable or critically acclaimed gaming company or website in the world, and it can still be destroyed from the top down by finance people who care more about the next quarter's profits than any sort of long-term sustainability. We've seen companies broken up, sold for parts, the employees all fired or poorly replaced by air quotes AI. We've seen games ruined by pay-to-win mechanics, arbitrary microtransactions, and other predatory monetization schemes. We've seen CEO payouts skyrocket while their employees, the ones who actually make the games, can get laid off at a moment's notice. These are the actual things that are hurting the games industry. Anyway, I'll wrap up today with a message to Mark Kern. So, Mark, you can't just hitch your culture war wagon to whatever new game is passing by and expect that to reset media back to how you thought it was 30 years ago. Obviously, it's not going to happen. It's not possible. And if you think I'm wrong there, and it is possible for a video game to do that, you are supposedly a video game developer. You are allegedly making a video game, if you can remember. So why don't you be the change you want to see in the world? Listen to the people who, for some reason that I do not understand, actually still look forward to Ember. If all you do is react in the culture war, you lose. You're not going to get anywhere by just complaining about how the tide is turning against you. You need to create your own things, and not just for silly culture war reasons. You have taken a lot of money off people with assurances that you would make a video game. But Grumps is much too busy, of course. You see, Subnautica 2 has some characters who aren't white in the trailer. He doesn't like the new Tomb Raider cartoon. The next Assassin's Creed game has a black character in it. Hephaestus from Hades 2 is in a wheelchair. Oh, we did this one. Just the same old rubbish over and over again. The grift economy grinds on, and poor old Stellar Blade, once the centre of attention, is now all but forgotten, as all these new grifts will be too in time, to be replaced with newer, equally pointless ones. Each piece of media being examined with fickle and fleeting attention, scanned at the surface level solely for the purpose of sorting it into one of two categories, the sole determinant of worth: woke or unwoke. What a shallow and frustrating way of engaging with art, using up your limited time on the earth to experience it. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching today, folks, and thank you especially to all of my supporters over on Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to all my videos, so if that's something that interests you, I'll leave a link in the description for you to check out. Okay, that's all from me today, folks. I'll see you next time. Bye.